The sound of a hammer striking iron echoed through the dusty streets of Redemption Creek, Colorado, as Thea Zimmerman stared at the charred remains of what was once her home. The year was 1878, and at 24 years old, she had already endured more heartbreak than most would face in a lifetime. 3 months since the fire that claimed not only her house, but her husband Robert and their infant son, yet the pain remained as raw as the day it happened. "Miss Zimmerman, I've brought your mail," called Henry, the freckle-faced boy who ran errands for the post office. He approached cautiously, as most folks did these days, treating her like fine china that might shatter at the slightest touch. "Thank you," she replied, her voice hollow as she accepted the single envelope. Another condolence letter, no doubt. They still trickled in from distant relatives and friends who had only recently heard of her tragedy. The town of Redemption Creek had been kind, offering shelter and sympathy in equal measure. She had taken a small room above the general store and found work as a seamstress, but existence was merely that existing, not living. Each morning she rose before dawn. Each night she fell into dreamless sleep, and in between she moved through the world like a ghost, touching nothing, feeling nothing. "Mrs. Halloway asked if you might come by today," Henry added. "Said she has some mending that can't wait." Thea nodded. "Tell her I'll be there afternoon." As Henry scampered off, Thea's gaze drifted toward the livery stable at the end of the street where a commotion had broken out. A magnificent black stallion reared and bucked as a tall figure fought to control it. Despite herself, she paused to watch the struggle between man and beast. The horse gave one final defiant buck before settling, and the man removed his hat to wipe his brow. Even from a distance, there was something striking about him, the confident set of his shoulders, the way he spoke soothingly to the animal that had just tried to throw him. Thea turned away. She had no business admiring strangers, no room in her shattered heart for curiosity. The dead weight of grief was her only companion now, and she had made her peace with that. Later that afternoon, as she walked to Mrs. Halloway's with her sewing basket in hand, the heavens opened. The sudden summer storm caught everyone by surprise, sending townspeople scurrying for shelter. Thea quickened her pace, but the rain fell in sheets, drenching her dress within seconds. "Madam, over here," a deep voice called. She glanced toward the sound and saw a man gesturing from the covered porch of the feed store. With no other option, she dashed toward the shelter, arriving breathless and dripping. "Mighty sudden storm," the man commented, and Thea recognized him as the horse tamer from the livery. Up close, she could see he was younger than she'd thought, perhaps 28 or 30, with eyes the color of a clear winter sky and a jawline shadowed with stubble. "Thank you," she managed, keeping a respectable distance. "Zach Emerson." He introduced himself with a slight tip of his hat. "Just rode into town yesterday." "Thea Zimmerman," she replied automatically, wringing water from her skirt. "Pleasure to meet you, Miss Zimmerman. Though I reckon it's Mrs.?" His eyes flicked to the thin gold band she still wore. "It's Mrs.," she confirmed, her tone closing the subject. They stood in awkward silence, watching the rain pound the dusty street into mud. Thea became uncomfortably aware of how her wet clothing clung to her frame and crossed her arms defensively. "You're shivering," Zach observed, shrugging out of his long duster. "Please, take this." "That's not necessary," she protested, but he draped it around her shoulders anyway. The coat was warm from his body and smelled of leather, tobacco, and horses, not unpleasant, but startlingly intimate. "My ma would tan my hide if she knew I let a lady catch her death on account of propriety," he said with a half-smile that crinkled the corners of his eyes. Despite herself, Thea felt a flicker of something warm beneath her ribs. She quickly extinguished it. "You're not from around here." "No, madam. Montana originally, but I've been working cattle drives these past few years. Following the work where it takes me." "And what brings you to Redemption Creek?" she asked, more to fill the silence than from genuine interest. "The railroad's coming. Heard they need men to help clear land, lay track. Figured it was steady work for a spell." He leaned against a post, utterly at ease. "And yourself? You been here long?" "All my life," she replied, then added, "Mrs. Halloway is expecting me. I should go once the rain lets up." Zach nodded, seeming to sense her withdrawal. "Rain's slacking now. Allow me to walk you there." "That's not. Please, Mrs. Zimmerman. That mud'll ruin your shoes," and it'd be my honor." Before she could formulate another refusal, he stepped to the edge of the porch and offered his arm. Something about his earnest expression made further protest seem churlish, so she reluctantly accepted, returning his coat first. As they navigated the muddy street, Zach kept a respectful distance while ensuring she avoided the worst puddles. He didn't press for conversation, and Thea was grateful. When they reached Mrs. Halloway's grand house on the north side of town, he tipped his hat again. "Thank you, Mr. Emerson," she said formally. "Zach, please," he replied. "And it was my pleasure, Mrs. Zimmerman. Hope our paths cross again." As he walked away, Thea was struck by the absence of pity in his eyes when he'd looked at her. Everyone in town gazed at her with that unbearable sympathy, but this stranger had treated her like any other woman. It was refreshing. Mrs. Halloway's mending kept Thea busy for hours. By the time she finished, the sun was setting, painting the western sky in brilliant oranges and pinks. She walked slowly back toward town, her mind unexpectedly drifting to the cowboy's kind eyes. "Foolishness," she murmured to herself. Her heart was dead and buried alongside Robert and baby James. Whatever she'd felt today was merely the surprise of being treated normally after months of kid gloves and whispers. The next morning dawned clear and bright. Thea rose and dressed for work, pinning her thick chestnut hair into a severe bun. The face that gazed back from her small mirror was pale and solemn, with dark circles beneath green eyes that had once sparkled with laughter. She didn't recognize herself anymore. At the dress shop where she worked, Mrs. Peterson greeted her with a concerned smile. "You're looking peaky today, dear. Did you eat breakfast?" "I wasn't hungry," Thea replied, arranging her sewing supplies at her work table. In truth, she rarely felt hunger anymore, eating only enough to keep going. "Well, there's fresh bread and preserves in the back. Help yourself," Mrs. Peterson said, her motherly concern evident. "We've got the Thornton wedding dress to finish today. The lace arrived on yesterday's stage." Thea nodded, grateful to lose herself in work. The intricate beadwork required such concentration that she couldn't dwell on her own thoughts. Hours passed in a blur of tiny stitches and delicate fabric. The bell above the shop door jangled, and Mrs. Peterson hurried to greet the customer. Thea kept her head down, focusing on a particularly challenging section of lace. "Mrs. Zimmerman?" The deep voice startled her, and she pricked her finger with the needle. Looking up, she found Zach Emerson standing awkwardly by her table, hat in hand. "Mr. Emerson," she acknowledged, setting aside her work and discreetly sucking the bead of blood from her finger. "I apologize for disturbing you," he said. "Mrs. Peterson said I might find you here." Mrs. Peterson, Thea noticed, was watching with undisguised interest from behind the counter. The older woman hadn't seen Thea speak to a man under 40 in months. "Is there something I can help you with?" Thea asked, her tone professional. "I was hoping," he cleared his throat. "That is, I found this." He reached into his pocket and withdrew a small silver thimble. "After our encounter yesterday, thought it might be yours." Thea recognized it immediately. It had been her mother's, one of the few keepsakes she'd managed to salvage from the fire. She must have dropped it during the rainstorm. "It is mine," she said, genuine gratitude softening her voice. "Thank you for returning it." He placed it carefully on her table. Figured it might be important. Looked like an heirloom. "It was my mother's," she confirmed. "She taught me to sew with it." "Well, I'm glad I found it then." He shifted his weight, seeming reluctant to leave. "I also wanted to ask, there's a town social this Saturday. Dance at the meeting hall. I was wondering if you might consider attending." The question caught Thea completely off guard. "Mr. Emerson, just as friends," he added quickly. "I don't know a soul in town except you, and thought maybe." He trailed off, looking embarrassed. "Never mind." It was presumptuous. Mrs. Peterson chose that moment to interject. "The socials for the railroad workers, Thea. Everyone's going. You should come too. It's been months since you've been to any town gathering." Thea felt trapped between Zach's hopeful expression and Mrs. Peterson's encouragement. "I don't dance anymore," she said finally. "Neither do I," Zach replied with a self-deprecating smile. "Two left feet. But I hear there'll be pie." Despite herself, Thea felt the ghost of a smile tug at her lips. "I'll consider it," she said, surprising herself. His face brightened. "That's all I can ask. Good day, Mrs. Zimmerman." With a nod to Mrs. Peterson, he departed, the bell tinkling in his wake. My, Mrs. Peterson murmured. Handsome fellow. It's not like that, Thea said quickly. He's just being kind. Kind is good. The older woman replied wisely. And it wouldn't hurt you to be around people again, dear. For the rest of the week, Thea debated with herself about the social. Part of her felt it would be a betrayal of Robert's memory to enjoy herself at a dance. Another part, a tiny, persistent voice she tried to silence, whispered that perhaps it was time to rejoin the living. Saturday evening arrived, and Thea stood before her mirror in indecision. She had washed her hair, and it hung in soft waves down her back. Her best dress, a deep blue calico that brought out the green in her eyes, lay on the bed, but she hadn't put it on yet. A knock at her door startled her. Who is it? She called. It's Mary from downstairs, came the reply. Mrs. Peterson sent me with something for you. Curious, Thea opened the door to find the general store owner's daughter holding a package wrapped in brown paper. She said you might need this for tonight, Mary explained, handing it over. Inside was a pretty cream-colored shawl with delicate embroidery. A note in Mrs. Peterson's handwriting read, Every lady needs something new sometimes. The social starts at 7. I'll save you a seat. Thea's throat tightened with emotion. Such thoughtfulness was overwhelming after months of self-imposed isolation. Before she could talk herself out of it, she donned the blue dress, arranged her hair in a looser style than her usual severe bun, and draped the new shawl over her shoulders. The town meeting hall was aglow with lantern light when Thea approached, the sound of fiddle music and laughter spilling into the evening air. She hesitated at the entrance, suddenly terrified. What was she doing here? People would stare, whisper about poor widow Zimmerman finally showing her face. You came. She turned to find Zach standing a few feet away, dressed in clean trousers and a pressed white shirt, his usual worn hat replaced by a newer one. He looked handsome, she admitted to herself. I said I would consider it, she replied, still poised to flee. And I'm mighty glad you did. He offered his arm. Shall we brave it together? I warn you, I know exactly 3 people in there, and one's the bartender. His self-deprecating humor eased her tension slightly. I suppose we could make an appearance, she conceded, placing her hand lightly on his arm. Inside, the hall was crowded with townsfolk and railroad workers. True to her word, Mrs. Peterson had saved Thea a seat at a table near the refreshments. As they made their way through the crowd, Thea felt the weight of curious glances, but to her surprise, they weren't pitying, just interested. Thea, you look lovely, Mrs. Peterson exclaimed, rising to embrace her. And this must be Mr. Emerson. I'm Beatrice Peterson. Madam, Zach greeted her with a respectful nod. Thank you for encouraging Mrs. Zimmerman to attend. It's made my evening considerably brighter. Thea felt a blush rise to her cheeks at his words. It had been so long since anyone had paid her a compliment that she'd forgotten how to receive one. The evening progressed more pleasantly than Thea had anticipated. She declined offers to dance, but enjoyed watching others while she sipped punch and nibbled on sweet cake. Zach remained by her side, occasionally sharing observations that made her smile despite herself. See that fellow by the fiddle player? He murmured. He stepped on his partner's toes 4 times. Makes me feel better about my own dancing. You can't be that bad, she replied. Care to test that theory? He extended his hand as the music slowed to a gentle waltz. Thea hesitated. Dancing seemed like crossing a line she wasn't ready for. I don't think, just once around the floor, he coaxed. Then if I've mangled your feet, we'll sit the rest out. Something in his earnest expression melted her resistance. Once, she agreed, placing her hand in his. As they joined the other couples, Thea felt a flutter of anxiety. Zach's hand at her waist was warm and steady, a touch she hadn't experienced in months. She kept a proper distance between them, her back rigid. Relax, he murmured. I won't bite, though I might step on your toes. Contrary to his warnings, Zach moved with surprising grace for such a tall man. Thea found herself following his lead almost without thinking, muscle memory from happier times guiding her steps. See? Not so terrible, he said with a smile that reached his eyes. You're a fraud, Mr. Emerson, she replied. You dance quite well. Don't tell anyone. I have a reputation to maintain. His hand tightened slightly at her waist as he guided her through a turn, and Thea felt a jolt of something. Awareness. It alarmed her. I think that's enough, she said abruptly, pulling away. Thank you for the dance. Confusion crossed his face, but he released her immediately. Of course. Would you like some air? It's getting warm in here. Grateful for the suggestion, Thea nodded. They made their way outside, where the evening had cooled considerably. Stars blanketed the sky, impossibly bright against the darkness. I'm sorry if I made you uncomfortable, Zach said after a moment. Thea wrapped her shawl more tightly around her shoulders. It's not you. It's been a long time since I've done anything like this. Because of your husband? She nodded, not trusting her voice. May I ask what happened? Only if you wish to tell me, he added quickly. No one had asked her directly in months. They all knew the story, had whispered it behind her back. His simple question pierced something inside her. There was a fire, she said, her voice barely audible. Robert, my husband, he went back in for James, our son. He was only 6 months old. Her throat closed around the words. Neither of them made it out. Zach was silent for a long moment. I'm truly sorry, Thea, he finally said, using her first name without seeming to realize it. That's a burden no one should have to bear. Everyone says time heals, she continued, the words spilling out now that she'd started. But it doesn't feel that way. It feels like I'm standing still while the world moves on without me. I lost my brother in the war, Zach said quietly. Different kind of loss, I reckon, but I remember that feeling. Like you're underwater, watching everyone else breathe normally. His understanding, free from platitudes, loosened something in Thea's chest. Yes, exactly like that. They stood in companionable silence, gazing at the stars. When Zach spoke again, his voice was thoughtful. After Thomas died, I rode the wildest horses I could find. Figured if one broke my neck, well, that'd be that. Took a bad fall, eventually shattered my leg, so bad the doctor wanted to take it. He tapped his right leg. Still aches when it rains. But lying there, thinking I might lose it, I realized Thomas would have been furious with me for throwing away what he lost. Thea considered his words. I'm not sure I know how to live anymore, she admitted. Sometimes I'm not sure I want to. You don't have to know right away, Zach replied. Just taking a single step like coming tonight, that's enough to start. His understanding moved her more than any sympathy had. Thank you for the dance, Zach, she said softly, using his first name deliberately, and for the conversation. He smiled, the starlight catching in his eyes. Anytime, Thea. Anytime at all. In the weeks that followed, Thea found herself looking forward to Zach's visits to the dress shop. He would stop by with trivial questions about the town or requests for minor mending jobs, transparent excuses that neither of them acknowledged. Sometimes he brought her wildflowers he'd found while working on the railroad clearing or interesting stones that caught his eye. Their friendship developed slowly, carefully. Thea remained guarded, but found herself smiling more, even laughing occasionally at Zach's dry humor. The townsfolk noticed the change in her, and while some whispered about impropriety a widow spending time with a single man, so soon most were simply relieved to see life returning to her eyes. One warm Sunday afternoon in late August, Zach invited her on a picnic by the creek that gave the town its name. Mrs. Peterson's packed enough food for 10 people, he said, holding up a large basket. Be ashamed to let it go to waste. The day was perfect, clear skies, a gentle breeze, wildflowers carpeting the meadow. They found a spot beneath a cottonwood tree, its leaves rustling soothingly above them. Zach spread a blanket while Thea unpacked the food, fried chicken, biscuits, apple preserves, and a cherry pie. Mrs. Peterson's trying to fatten you up, Zach observed with a grin. Not that I'm complaining. As they ate, he told her stories of his travels, cattle drives through Montana, a winter spent in a mining town in Colorado, a brief stint as a horse trainer in Wyoming. Thea found herself captivated by his tales, glimpsing a world beyond the boundaries of Redemption Creek. What about you? He asked. Have you always lived here? Born and raised, she confirmed. Though Robert and I had plans to move west, maybe to California. He was a carpenter, could find work anywhere. She surprised herself by speaking of Robert without the usual stab of pain. He built our house himself. He sounds like a good man. He was, she said simply. The best I've known. Zach nodded, no jealousy or discomfort in his expression. Tell me about him, if you want, and she did. For the first time, Thea found herself sharing happy memories of Robert, his terrible singing voice, his habit of leaving tools everywhere, how he danced around the room with baby James to make him laugh. With each story, she felt not a reopening of wounds, but a gentle healing. I think he would have liked you, she concluded, surprising herself with the admission. High praise indeed, Zach replied softly. Thank you for sharing him with me. They were quiet for a while, listening to the creek bubbling nearby and birds calling in the trees. Thea lay back on the blanket, watching clouds drift across the sky, and realized with a start that she felt peaceful, truly peaceful for the first time in months. Penny for your thoughts, Zach said, propping himself on one elbow beside her. I was just thinking that I feel lighter today, she admitted. Like I can breathe properly again. His smile was gentle. That's good, Thea. Real good. The warmth in his eyes made her heart flutter in a way that was both frightening and exhilarating. She sat up abruptly. We should head back. It's getting late. If he was disappointed by her sudden withdrawal, he didn't show it. Of course. Let me pack up. As summer gave way to fall, Thea found herself increasingly drawn to Zach's steady presence. They established a routine. Sunday picnics when weather permitted, walks after she finished work, occasional dinners at the hotel restaurant. He never pressed for more than she was willing to give, respecting her need to move slowly. One crisp October evening, they strolled along the edge of town, watching the sunset paint the mountains with gold and crimson. Fallen leaves crunched beneath their boots, and the air carried the scent of wood smoke from nearby chimneys. Railroad work's nearly done, Zach commented. They'll be laying the last of the track next week. Thea felt a sudden chill that had nothing to do with the autumn air. Will you be moving on then? She asked, trying to keep her voice neutral. He stopped walking, turning to face her. That depends. On what? On whether there's reason for me to stay. His blue eyes searched hers. Is there, Thea? The question hung between them, weighted with all the things neither had spoken aloud. Thea's heart hammered against her ribs. I don't know what you're asking, she said, though she did. Yes, you do. He took a step closer. I care for you, Thea. More than I've cared for anyone in a long time. Maybe ever. Zach, let me finish, he said gently. I know you're still healing. I know your heart belongs to Robert, and I'd never ask you to change that. But I'm hoping there might be room in there for me too, someday. Tears filled her eyes. I can't, she whispered. My heart is too broken. It's not fair to you. Zach reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away, and brushed a tear from her cheek. Then let mine beat for us both, he said, his voice husky with emotion. Until yours is ready. The tenderness in his touch, the sincerity in his words, broke something open inside her, not in the shattering way of grief, but in the way spring breaks through frozen ground. Before she could second-guess herself, Thea stepped forward and pressed her lips to his. The kiss was gentle, tentative, a question more than a declaration. Zach's arms came around her carefully, as if she might shatter, and he returned the kiss with such restrained passion that Thea felt her knees weaken. When they parted, both breathless, she saw the wonder in his eyes and knew it matched her own. I can't promise anything, she said. I don't know if I'll ever be whole again. I'm not asking for promises, he replied. Just a chance. Stay with me, Thea? Let me stay with you. We'll figure out the rest as we go. That night, alone in her room, Thea took off her wedding ring for the first time since the fire. She didn't discard it instead. She placed it carefully in the small box where she kept her mother's thimble and a lock of baby James's hair. Treasures from a past that would always be part of her, but no longer defined her future. The first snow of winter fell in early December, transforming Redemption Creek into a wonderland of white. Thea stood at the window of her new home, a small but sturdy cabin Zach had built on the outskirts of town, watching fat flakes swirl in the twilight. Penny for your thoughts, Zach said, coming up behind her and slipping his arms around her waist. She leaned back against his chest, savoring his warmth. I was thinking about change, she replied. How life can transform as completely as the landscape does with snow. Good changes, I hope. There was a hint of uncertainty in his voice that touched her heart. Thea turned in his arms to face him. The best, she assured him, reaching up to trace the line of his jaw. I never thought I could feel this way again. Never thought I deserved to. You deserve every happiness, Thea Emerson, he said, using the name she had taken just 2 weeks prior in a simple ceremony at the town church. Their wedding had been small but joyful, with Mrs. Peterson weeping happy tears and the entire town turning out to celebrate. Some had whispered about the speed of their courtship, but those who mattered understood that Thea and Zach had recognized in each other something rare and precious, two souls who had known loss and chosen love anyway. "Do you think Robert would understand?" she asked, voicing the question that occasionally still troubled her in quiet moments. Zach considered her words carefully, as he always did when she spoke of her first husband. "I think a man who loved you enough to risk his life for your child would want you to be happy above all else," he said finally. "And I think he'd be proud of the woman you've become, strong enough to carry your grief without letting it define you." Tears pricked at her eyes, but they weren't the devastating tears of loss. Rather, they were tears of healing, of gratitude. "How did I find you?" she whispered. "I believe we found each other," he replied, pressing his forehead to hers. Two broken pieces that somehow fit together. Outside, the snow continued to fall, covering the land in a blanket of renewal. Inside, by the warmth of their hearth, Thea and Zach Emerson held each other, their hearts beating in tandem, his strong and steady, hers mending but resilient, both full of hope for the seasons to come. As the first year of their marriage passed, Redemption Creek flourished with the coming of the railroad. Zach's carpentry skills proved in high demand as new buildings sprang up, while Thea's dressmaking business thrived with the influx of newcomers. They saved their earnings carefully, planning for a future neither had dared imagine before finding each other. In the spring of 1880, as wildflowers once again carpeted the meadows around town, Thea placed Zach's hand on her slightly rounded belly, watching his eyes widen with wonder and joy. "Are you certain?" he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "Dr. Williams confirmed it yesterday," she nodded, her own eyes shining. "He says everything looks healthy. The baby should arrive by autumn." Zach dropped to his knees before her, pressing his face against her middle. "Hello, little one," he murmured. "Your mama and I have been waiting for you." Thea ran her fingers through his hair, heart overflowing. There had been a time when she believed joy was forever beyond her reach, when grief had hollowed her so completely she thought nothing could ever fill the void. Yet here she stood, remade by love she hadn't sought, but had found nonetheless. "Are you happy?" Zach asked, looking up at her with such tenderness it nearly overwhelmed her. "More than I ever thought possible," she replied honestly. "You taught me that a heart can break and still beat. That love isn't a finite resource, but grows with each person we welcome into our lives." He stood and gathered her close, his hand still resting protectively over their unborn child. "Robert and James will always be part of you," he said. "Part of us. This baby doesn't replace them." "I know," she whispered against his chest. "They're the stars in our sky, watching over us. And this little one," she placed her hand over his, "is our new dawn." As autumn painted the landscape in golds and crimsons, Thea gave birth to a daughter they named Hope, for what she represented to them both. As Thea watched Zach cradle their newborn with gentle hands that trembled with emotion, she felt the final pieces of her heart knit together, not erasing the scars of her past, but incorporating them into something stronger, deeper, and more beautiful than before. Her heart, once too broken for love, now beat strong and true, in perfect harmony with his.